Well, welcome to the tool review channel, and on today's episode we are taking a look at the FUJIYA 8-inch high leverage diagonal cutters. Now this is model number 700N-200. I do believe they offer a couple other variations of the diagonal cutters. I believe one of them is a 7-inch version of these as well. I am not sure on the product number on that one, but this one is obviously 700N-200. So this is a diagonal cutter that also features a wire crimper on the tool as well. And so starting off with looking at the tool, this is obviously a made in Japan product right there. I believe that is a manufacturer laser etching right there as well. You got the FUJIYA logo right there on the tool as well, followed by your product number right there as well. And then it says high leverage on the rivet joint, which is pretty nice as well. And then you come down to your handles, you have FUJIYA molded into the plastic grip. Now, if you've watched my other FUJIYA reviews, you would know that this is kind of a mix between a comfort grip and like a hard plastic grip. Definitely not as thick as the comfort grip handles for some tool manufacturers, but definitely not as thin as just the standard dipped handles. And it does have this nice texturing, as you can see right there. It's got this nice texturing pattern that goes halfway around the handle, which is nice. And then coming to the end, you have two tie-off points. So if you're working at a height with this tool and you need to tether it off, you could tether it to either one of these points right there as well. And then obviously right here, you have your crimping, little crimping die right there as well. And then coming to the side of the tool, as you can see your cutting edge right there. You got your high leverage rivet design right there. So your rivet is a lot closer to the cutting edge. So you have to use less force when cutting through material. But that is really about it for the aesthetics of this tool. We'll get to some of the functionality of this tool. So when I first got these pliers, they're a little bit stiff, and I did use some oil to loosen them up. As you can see, they're a little bit stiff, but that is how far they will open, and then they will close a little bit stiff. But for the most part, they are pretty much worked pretty loose, which is nice. And as you can see, oil is coming out of the joint right there. So now we're going to get into cutting some material and see how well they handle that. So obviously, if you've been around the channel for a while, you know I like to start off with some 14 gauge wire. Obviously, these cutters should have no problem getting through it. And as you can see right there, no problem getting through the 14 gauge wire at all. Right there, cuts it no problem. So we'll move that out of the way, and we'll bring in some 12 gauge stranded wire. That was also 14 gauge stranded wire as well. So we'll bring in some 12 gauge stranded wire and see how well it can cut this. And as you can see, has no problem cutting the 12 gauge stranded wire. Right there as well. Definitely a nice sharp cutter, I must say. So now we'll bring in some 10 gauge stranded wire right here, and we'll see how well that they can cut through that. And as you can see, you do have to use a little bit of force, but definitely not a lot of force. Obviously cuts through the wire no problem. So now we'll bring in some just straight copper. I believe this is 12 gauge, so we'll put that aside. We'll bring out the 14 gauge real quick, solid copper right there. And as you can see, has no problem cutting the 14 gauge. So now we'll bring in the 12 gauge right here and see how well it can cut through that. And as you can see, has no problem cutting through the 14 gauge. You can see it just kind of like shoots it off into the distance right there. So that is nice. Definitely has no problem cutting through the 12 gauge wire. So now I'll bring in some Romex wire and see how well I can cut through that. So this is 14-2 with ground. So there's 3 wires in there. And we'll see how well I can cut through this. And as you can see, it cuts through the 14 gauge, no problem. Do another cut for you right there. As you can see, it cuts through it, no problem. And you barely have to use any leverage to cut through it, which is nice. So now we'll bring in some 12 gauge wire right here, and we'll see how well it can cut through that. So as you can see, put it in there. Definitely have to use a little bit more force on this one, but as you can see, no problem cutting through that as well. Just kind of ejects it off into the the abyss. But as you can see, it has no problem cutting through the 12 gauge wire, the 12-2 Romex wire. So now we're going to test out these crimpers on the bottom. So we'll clear out all the wire we just cut from the background, and we'll get to the crimping function on this tool. So we're obviously going to start off with my favorite, the 14 gauge wire. I already pre-stripped it, so we'll put a nice little terminal on there, and we will see how well the crimpers on this tool will work. So you just got to insert it right there, and you just put a little pressure down on the tool. And as you can see, the terminal likes to stick there, but as you can see, It's quite a decent grip, or quite a decent crimp, I should say. I did bend that little fork a little bit. Obviously, you can bend that back, and you're able to put that onto a little screw or something if needed. So that was the 14 gauge stranded wire. So now we will bring in the 12 gauge stranded wire and see how well we can do a crimp with that. So I'll just put a little wire nut on there as well, and then we'll put it in the crimping die, and we'll see how well of a crimp we can get on the 12 gauge wire. So as you can see right there, you gotta put a little bit of force down on there, and it does like to stick, but as you can see right there, that's actually gonna come off, but the terminal itself stayed on pretty well, and it's not gonna be going anywhere anytime soon. So now I'll bring in some 10 gauge stranded wire right here, and we will test out the function of the crimper on this size wire as well. So we'll put that into the terminal, and then we'll crimp the terminal onto there. As you can see right there, all you gotta do is push down on it, and you have a nice crimp on there, and that terminal isn't going anywhere anytime soon, except for the plastic that wants to come off these cheap terminals. But as you can see right there, it does a fairly nice crimp on the wire as well. So now we'll bring in some solid wire. So we'll bring in some 14. Now we'll start with the 12 gauge actually. We'll bring in some 12 gauge solid wire right here. We'll put a little terminal on there, and we'll see how well this works on solid wire. As you saw, it worked pretty great on the stranded wire, so I'm hoping for the same results for the solid wire. And as you can see right there, just kind of bent the forks on the terminal right there, and it did kind of come off, probably because I didn't crimp it well enough. So that is kind of a fail on my part. Maybe we can bring another terminal in and see if we can get a better crimp on there. So I'll put another terminal on there and see if I can get a better crimp on there. That was most likely my fault. So crimp another terminal on there and see if that does any better. And nope, doesn't do any better with the 12 gauge solid wire. So unless the terminals, these are just crappy terminals. So we'll see how well it works with some 14 gauge solid wire. So we'll see if we can get a nice crimp on there as well. And we'll put it in there, and we'll crimp down on the wire. And as you can see, it works well with the 14 gauge, so I must have just had two bad terminals right there. So if it works on the 14 gauge, I'm sure it'll work fine on the 12 gauge if you just do it right. But that is it for the crimping. And now we'll bring in one last thing to cut test with this. We'll bring in some brass rod right here. This is 1/16 size, and we'll see how well these cutters can cut through that. And as you can see, has no problem cutting the 1/16 size brass right there. Now we'll bring in some 3/32 size brass rod, a little bit thicker. We'll see how well it cuts through that. And as you can see, it has no problem cutting through that and shooting it at my white background. As you can see there, cuts it no problem. So overall, these are definitely a nice pair of diagonal cutters. Like I said, made in Japan. So they are a nice high quality tool. They use a fairly high carbon steel for it, so it's going to last like the German brand tools. But the advantage these have over the German tools is their price. They're definitely not as high priced as the German brand tools. So if you are looking to if you're looking to add some higher quality tools to your tool bag or your tool collection in general, and you don't really want to pay the German tool price, definitely check these out. I picked them up on Amazon. They're fairly affordable. I believe they're like $35, something like that. Definitely affordable, and if you don't really have the budget for the German brand stuff, these are a nice alternative. But that's all I have for this review. So if you are new to the channel and you aren't subscribed, please consider hitting the subscribe button if you'd like to see more videos like this. And if you enjoyed this review, please give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to follow my social media, I will have a link to my Instagram in the description below. But that is it for this video, so thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next video to be uploaded.